Imagine the fields of Gettysburg soaked not in the blood of a failed charge, but in the pride of a Southern victory. The year is 1863. General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia smashes through Union defenses in Pennsylvania. The high ground falls. The Union lines collapse in disarray. The retreat becomes a rout. For a moment, the unthinkable becomes reality. The Confederacy has a path not only to victory, but to Washington itself. And then the dominoes begin to fall. Northern morale shatters. Lincoln's political position becomes untenable. Anti-war Democrats surge in power, and Britain and France, long hesitant, recognize the Confederate States as a sovereign nation. A ceasefire is declared. Peace negotiations begin, not with the Union dictating terms, but with two Americas staring across a fractured table. This is the world we now enter. The Confederate States of America, victorious and sovereign, survives not as a rogue rebellion, but as a new nation. Its founding principles, including the protection of slavery, are preserved in law and culture. And yet, the seeds of change are already in the soil. The moment of victory is the peak, and from that height, the long, uneven descent begins. The South won the war, but could it win the peace? In the immediate years after independence, the Confederacy holds firm to its institutions. Slavery remains legal and central to its economy, but it is no longer a question of war. It is now a question of time. Because while the Confederacy's elite celebrate victory, the world beyond its borders begins to shift. International recognition comes with strings. Britain and France, while willing to recognize the CSA, remain under pressure from anti-slavery forces at home. Diplomatic support is cautious, conditional. Trade resumes, but pressure mounts. Modern nations don't want to be seen aligning permanently with slavery. Internally, cracks emerge too. The South's economy, based on cotton, begins to strain. Mechanization creeps in. Industrialization is slower than in the North, but inevitable. As cities rise and railroads stretch deeper into the interior, the plantation model becomes more fragile. Some states begin to experiment with manumission schemes and gradual compensation. A few progressive voices, not abolitionist in name, but reformist in spirit, begin to argue that slavery is unsustainable. Over the next generation, the Confederacy does not explode, but it evolves. Slavery is not abolished in a single moment, but chipped away. A manumission act in Virginia. Gradual emancipation in Tennessee. Freedom for children born after a certain date in Georgia. Emancipated blacks begin to form communities within the South. Unequal, often segregated, but increasingly numerous. The Confederacy remains a conservative, hierarchical society, but one forced to adapt to survive. North of the border, the Union rebuilds. Its defeat stings, but it proves catalytic. Without the South's political power, the Northern economy booms. Chicago, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh transform into industrial powerhouses. Immigration accelerates. Railroads crisscross the continent. The United States becomes a modern nation faster than ever before. A sense of mission hardens. America has unfinished business. The Union is no longer about preserving the old, it's about perfecting the new. And so two rival powers emerge. Two visions of what America might be. The industrial, increasingly progressive North. The aristocratic, cautious, but gradually reforming South. They eye each other not with muskets, but with suspicion, diplomacy, and pressure. For the average person, the world is strange but not unlivable. In Atlanta, a Confederate citizen reads a paper praising free enterprise while carefully avoiding the subject of race. In Philadelphia, a Union schoolchild recites a pledge to a flag missing half its stars. Families divided by war build new lives in separate countries. Smugglers ferry banned literature across the borders. Train lines stop at militarized checkpoints. The American continent, once united, is now a Cold War of culture. But beneath that uneasy peace, history is still moving. Because the real question is no longer who won the war. The real question is, what kind of nations emerge from its aftermath, and what they do with the century to come. The years turn, and the Confederate States settles into its identity, not just as a breakaway republic, but as a distinct civilization. Its leaders speak of honor, heritage, and Southern destiny. Its cities grow slowly, Richmond, Charleston, New Orleans, becoming bastions of a culture steeped in hierarchy, tradition, and control. While the North charges ahead with mass industrialization, the South modernizes more cautiously, unwilling to abandon the old ways too quickly, but keenly aware of the world's changing tide. In the 1880s, Confederate leaders can no longer ignore reality. The cotton economy is under strain. Competition from Egypt, India, and even American textiles undercuts prices. The planters, once untouchable, start to wobble. A few reformers, many former generals or merchants, begin to whisper what was once unthinkable. Emancipation, not as a moral imperative, but as an economic strategy. At first, their ideas are met with scorn, but practicality has a way of prying open even the most rigid minds. By the turn of the century, the Confederacy is experimenting. Slavery is abolished in some border states, not with celebration, but with silence. Compensation is paid. Freedmen are offered limited civil rights, but heavily restricted through laws and voting qualifications. It is not justice. It is not equality. But it is motion, a slow, bitter thaw. In Louisiana and Mississippi, industrialists begin hiring free black labor for wages. They don't do it out of compassion. They do it because it's cheaper, more stable, more modern. Black churches grow. Underground schools appear in major cities. A black middle class, small, cautious, and closely watched, emerges. But there is tension. Always tension. Racial violence flares. Freedmen are beaten, lynched, pushed from towns where the old way still rules. Confederate newspapers preach civility, but stoke fear. The CSA becomes a nation of contradictions. Modernizing, but haunted. Independent, but uncertain. Victorious in war, but fractured in peace. Meanwhile, the Union roars into the 20th century like a locomotive on fire. Its cities explode with energy. New York becomes a global hub. Chicago rivals London. With the South gone, Northern politics lean hard toward progressivism. Child labor laws, public education, voting rights, these aren't just ideals, they're tools of competition. The Union doesn't just want to succeed. It wants to prove it made the right bet in 1865. It does so with immigrants. Millions pour in from Ireland, Italy, Germany, and Eastern Europe. They fill factories, join unions, attend public schools. The Northern economy becomes a beast. Ruthless, dynamic, and unrelenting. And then, in 1914, the world changes again. World War I erupts in Europe. And for the first time in 50 years, the two Americas must choose a side. The Union, industrial and well-connected, throws its support behind Britain and France. Its weapons, its ships, and eventually, its soldiers join the bloodbath in Europe. The Confederate States, cautious, more inward-looking, declares neutrality. It trades with both sides, quietly profiting from the chaos abroad. But neutrality is not isolation. Confederate banks grow. Southern shipping expands. And for the first time, the world starts to see the CSA not just as a relic of slavery, but as a permanent part of the global order. In the aftermath of World War I, both Americas emerge stronger, but differently shaped. The Union gains international prestige. Its economy booms. Its military grows, but its racial divisions sharpen. Black veterans return from France demanding rights and face violence in the streets. The Confederacy, slower to mobilize, benefits from staying out. It suffers less. Its economy stabilizes. And in 1925, the final federal manumission bill passes in Montgomery. Slavery as an institution is officially dead, but the ghost remains. The Confederate South transitions into a caste society. Legal segregation becomes national policy. Voting rights are restricted by property, education, and race. Civil rights organizations are watched, infiltrated, and suppressed. But still, the slow march continues. By the 1930s, Confederate universities are among the best in the Western Hemisphere. Southern inventors build rail hubs and early telegraph networks. The oil fields of Texas and Louisiana fuel expansion. Birmingham becomes the CSA's steel capital. And a new generation of black Southern citizens, scarred by the past but born into freedom, begin to imagine more than survival. They begin to imagine power. To the average Confederate in 1939, life feels stable, predictable, even proud. But history, as always, is waiting. And just over the Atlantic, it's about to explode again. The year is 1939. Europe trembles as Germany invades Poland. The Second World War begins. And once again, the two Americas, still divided by flags, laws, and histories, face a common question: how will they respond? In the Union, there's no hesitation. The industrial North, already aligned with Britain and France, gears up for war. President La Follette, progressive, pragmatic, rallies support. Factories switch to war production. Troops are mobilized. The Union is still bruised from the Great War, but its economy is stronger than ever. By 1941, the United States of the North is once again arming the Allies. But the Confederate States? The path is murkier. Still fiercely independent, the CSA views the war in Europe through a different lens. Germany's expansionism raises eyebrows, but sympathy for fascist rhetoric lingers in parts of the old planter aristocracy. The CSA's leadership walks a tightrope. Siding with Hitler risks international condemnation. Standing with the Allies risks Union entanglement. Eventually, pragmatism prevails. In 1942, after attacks on American shipping in the Atlantic, including Confederate vessels, President Longstreet declares war on the Axis powers. But unlike the Union, the Confederacy doesn't storm the beaches of Normandy. It guards its coasts, sends limited naval support, and provides oil and resources. Its role is smaller, regional, strategic. Still, it's enough. When the war ends in 1946, both North and South emerge changed. The Union is triumphant. It helped defeat fascism. Its cities are booming. Its scientists, many of them former immigrants or refugees, have developed a terrible new weapon. In this timeline, the atomic bomb is still born in the deserts of Nevada. Hiroshima and Nagasaki still burn, but the credit and the burden belongs entirely to the North. The Confederacy, cautious as ever, avoided devastation. It lost fewer lives. It gained new trading partners. And in the process, its economy entered the modern age. The war effort accelerated industry. Women entered the workforce in larger numbers. Black laborers found new opportunities in munitions and manufacturing. For many in the CSA, the war was a moment of cautious optimism. But the peace that follows is tense. Because in the aftermath of the war, the ideological gap between North and South grows wider than ever. The Union is now a superpower. The CSA is a regional heavyweight, and they don't agree on what victory means. The Union pushes for a new international order: open markets, democratic governments, collective security. It leads the formation of the United Nations. It sets the terms of peace in Europe and Asia. The Confederacy hesitates. It joins the UN, but under protest. It declines membership in the new International Court. It passes civil defense acts, fearing the rise of nuclear warfare. And at home, its slow reform continues. By 1950, formal segregation is the law in most southern states. Confederate schools remain divided. Voting rights are unequal. But pressure is building. International condemnation grows. Black citizens organize, protest, and resist. Some flee north. Others stay and fight through courts, through newspapers, through defiance. And it works. Slowly, reluctantly, the Confederate Congress begins to yield. The Education Reform Act of 1954 mandates funding for black schools. The Civil Representation Law of 1959 allows limited black political participation in urban areas. The system bends, but it doesn't yet break. In the Union, the 1960s are marked by prosperity and paranoia. The North, flush with power, fears Soviet expansion and watches the South warily. Nuclear weapons are now stockpiled on both sides of the Mason-Dixon line. Washington and Richmond glare across the border with suspicion. Espionage grows. Propaganda flies. The Cold Peace begins. And beneath that cold peace, a cultural revolution brews. Rock and roll, jazz, and television explode in both Americas, but their flavors differ. In the Union, rebellion is fashionable. Civil rights movements, counterculture, radical politics. In the Confederacy, tradition holds sway. Country music, honor culture, religious revivalism. Still, the walls are porous. Young Confederates buy Union records. Northern students read Southern literature. The shared language and shared history refuses to stay silent. A cultural exchange flourishes, even as politicians tighten borders and militarize speech. And by 1970, the world is tired. Two Americas, two flags, two nuclear arsenals, but one people too deeply connected to truly forget one another. Which begs the question, how long can this last? By 1970, the air is thick with history and with tension. Two Americas exist side by side, not enemies on the battlefield, but adversaries in identity. The war is a memory, but the divide is not. Borders remain sharp. Passports are different. Children in Atlanta learn a version of the past where secession was righteous. Children in Boston are taught it was treason. The same names, Lincoln, Lee, Davis, Grant, exist in textbooks on both sides, but their legacies have been carved by different chisels. And yet, cracks are forming. not in the walls between nations, but in the hearts of their people. By the 1970s, the Confederate States is finally confronting the ghosts it tried to outrun. The civil rights pressure cooker, so explosive in the Union, is now heating up across the South. A generation of black citizens born after emancipation is demanding not just freedom but equality. No more segregated schools. No more literacy tests. No more second-class citizenship hidden beneath patriotic language. The Confederate government resists, slowly, cautiously, but it is not made of stone. International eyes are watching. Trade partners are uneasy. And the young, both black and white, are restless. In 1972, a pivotal moment arrives when protesters in Birmingham occupy a federal courthouse. The footage, smuggled out, banned on Confederate television, finds its way into Northern broadcasts, into European newspapers, and into history. Under pressure, Confederate President Ellis signs the Civil Equality Act of 1974. It is not sweeping. It is not brave. But it is real. It begins the dismantling of segregation. Schools begin to integrate, violently, awkwardly, unevenly. Voting access expands, then contracts, then expands again. The South is not transformed overnight, but it is changing. At the same time, the Union is undergoing its own reckoning. Though prosperous and technologically dominant, the Union grapples with inequality, war fatigue, and cultural upheaval. The Vietnam War, waged aggressively in the 60s, has cost thousands of lives and fractured public trust. Northern cities riot. Trust in government falters. The Union may have won the 20th century militarily, but socially, it is bruised. In both nations, the 1980s arrive like a long exhale. Economic liberalization takes root. Computers begin to reshape business. Trade becomes easier, and despite their frosty politics, the Union and Confederacy cannot resist economic cooperation. Factories in Texas produce parts for Union tech firms. Northern capital flows into Southern tourism. Nashville and Charlotte boom with money from Chicago and New York. The border softens, not legally, but in spirit. And yet, the idea of reunification, once absurd, begins to return in hushed conversations. Not in government chambers, but in university debates among journalists, at kitchen tables. Two nations have lived side by side for over a century. Their people speak the same language. They watch the same movies. They listen to the same music. They intermarry. They read each other's history, even if through a cracked lens. What really keeps them apart? The answer lies in memory, in symbols, in stories. The Confederate flag still flies over courthouses in 1985. Statues of Jefferson Davis still stand in public squares. In the Union, there is resentment, a feeling that the South never atoned. In the South, there is defensiveness, a fear of being erased, of being rewritten. And yet, the world keeps spinning. By the 1990s, a new generation of leaders rises. Tech entrepreneurs, multicultural coalitions, post-war children with no memory of musket or cannon. The Cold Peace begins to thaw, not through diplomacy, but through bandwidth. The internet erases borders more effectively than any treaty. Confederate teens post on Northern message boards. Northern artists collaborate with Southern musicians. Online, there are no passports, just profiles. In 1998, for the first time, a joint cultural summit is held in Memphis. It is not political, it is not binding, but it is historic. Delegations from both nations agree to fund joint museums, language reforms, student exchange programs. The past is not forgotten, but it is questioned together. And then comes the 21st century. The 21st century begins not with gunfire, but with bandwidth. It's the great equalizer, the great dissolver of borders. The internet spreads fast and deep across both Americas, and with it comes a slow, irreversible unification of ideas. For over a century, the Confederate States and the Union have been two sovereign nations. But culture does what politics could not. It melts the lines. In 2001, when terror strikes in New York, both nations pause. The South mourns alongside the North. Flags are lowered across Texas and Virginia. Confederate citizens donate blood for Union victims. And for a brief moment, the old lines fade. Joint military drills follow. Intelligence sharing increases. Presidents meet. Enemies become partners not in treaty, but in necessity. Yet beneath the surface, questions remain. Not just about safety, but about identity. Who are we now? Still two nations? Or something new? By 2010, both countries are facing new pressures. Rising debt, climate change, energy insecurity, automation. Old rivalries begin to feel irrelevant. Young voters, less concerned with flags, more with futures, start electing leaders who speak of collaboration. The term Pan-American Compact becomes part of the political mainstream. It begins with trade, then immigration, then education. In 2015, both nations launch a joint space mission, the Liberty Victoria Initiative. A Confederate rocket, built in Houston, carries Union satellites into orbit. The symbolism is loud, but the intent is louder. We're better together, they're saying, even if no one dares say reunification aloud just yet. But the world keeps pushing. China rises, India surges. The European Union, fragile and frayed, teeters. The old post-war order is wobbling. And in this new, uncertain world, neither the Union nor the Confederacy can ignore what their citizens already know. Alone, they are powerful. But together, they are inevitable. And so, in 2025, a historic summit is held in Atlanta. 2 flags fly, 2 anthems play. But for the first time, they are not sung in opposition, they are sung in harmony. The South has changed. Not perfectly, not quickly, but meaningfully. It is no longer the Confederacy of 1865. Slavery is long gone. Segregation has been dismantled. Its cities are modern, diverse, global. Atlanta, Houston, and Raleigh rival their northern cousins in tech, education, and finance. The descendants of enslaved people now sit in parliament, run companies, teach history. They do not forget, but they refuse to be defined by chains. The North has changed too. It is no longer the union of iron rails and smokestacks. It is digital, fast, complex. But it is no longer arrogant. It no longer demands the South kneel. Instead, it listens. It negotiates. It remembers that victory in war does not grant wisdom in peace. So what happens next? Maybe not full reunification. Not at first. Too many ghosts. Too many old bones and too many old fields. But a merger of minds, of markets, of meaning, that begins now. A confederation of the Americas. 2 systems, interoperable. 2 currencies, exchangeable. 1 passport. Shared military command. Shared scientific ventures. Shared climate response. In schools, children read both histories. In airports, 1 flag waves, with 2 ribbons entwined. And while old monuments remain, new ones are built. Not to men with muskets, but to bridges, satellites, ideas. By 2050, the term Confederate no longer conjures rebellion or oppression. It means Southern. It means distinct, proud, evolved. By then, the last veterans of the Cold Peace have passed. The border patrol stations are museums. And the Mason-Dixon line is a tourist route with food trucks and jazz festivals. And the world? It sees the Pan-American Alliance as a single pillar, a twin-headed giant. Not perfect, not always united, but inseparable. A testament to what history could have broken, but didn't. So what if the South had won the American Civil War? It would have been a darker world at first. A slower, harsher path toward justice. A century marked by division and delay. But people are not static. Neither are nations. The Confederacy, victorious in arms, would eventually face a far harder battle, the battle for its own soul. And in this imagined world, it would win that too. Not by erasing its past, but by outgrowing it. Because history bends, sometimes in pain, sometimes in triumph, but always, eventually, towards something new. And in this timeline, the 2 Americas do not collapse into hatred or war. They evolve, they endure, and finally, they remember that they were never so different to begin with. This is Epic Explorations, and if this journey through an alternate past sparked something in you, subscribe for more. The next What If is just one twist of fate away.